Now we have Charlene here. So, hello, Charlene. Are you able to hear us?
Yes. Can you hear me?
Perfect. Yes. Loud and clear. Awesome.
Great.
So you're going to talk about working with sales, product marketing, partnering up with sales.
That's correct. Let me figure
All right.
out.
Awesome. Well, I'm looking forward to it. So feel free to share your slides if you have any, and the stage is yours.
All right, great. Well, thanks everyone for attending. So today I'm going to talk about how to collaborate with sales. So not just marketing, go to market. Go to market is, the end-to-end process between marketing and sales. And I think it's, especially in a lot of go to market organizations, it's really easy to get caught up on one side or the other. So the goal of today's talk is to talk about some best practices to ensure alignment. So first of all, who am I? I'm vice president and head of marketing at a company called Fin. And previous to Fin, I have been at Coupa Software, at Dell, and at McKinsey, where I've done a lot of different go-to-market roles, and specifically in the product marketing space. So what is Fin? Fin is a company that's tackling this big challenge in, especially in customer operations and the CX space, where as organizations have become more complex and as consumers have started to expect more from their retailers, from things like, for instance, you used to be able to just go to a furniture store and just buy whatever you wanted. But now consumers are expecting to go to one place, have a seamless experience that's highly customized for them. So they expect to have a couch from anywhere in the world, any color that they want, delivered to them in a seamless way. To support that, there's been a lot of organizational complexity that's developed, and especially for customer operations teams, there's more complex workflows, thousands of apps that they're sometimes working across, and then there's people all over the world. So Fin is able to take all that, collect data across all these different applications that people are using, and then identify ways to improve CSAT, efficiency, and compliance. It's a work insights platform, and we reveal ways that agents work across applications, which enables better coaching, processes, and technology for teams that are empowered to delight customers. We say we're the secret weapon of the world's fastest growing companies. We're backed by a lot of top VCs, and it's a fast growing company. Now, I bring that up as relevant because in the case of Fin, and in the case of a lot of companies I've been at previously, go-to-market is a huge expense. It's actually, for a lot of traditional providers, which are more kind of go-to-market led versus product led, marketing and sales is actually one of the biggest line items. So all this is to say that I've seen time and again the alignment between go-to-market in terms of having an efficient go-to-market process across marketing and sales is so important in order to get the outcomes that you want. So unfortunately, a common scenario that happens is you got this butting of heads between sales and marketing. And I put Game of Thrones here because that's sometimes how it feels like. And what this could look like is something along the lines of like, hey, I'm working on this campaign and I'm helping, come up with this new messaging. And meanwhile, sales, especially comes to product marketing, and it's like, I need this, it's super urgent. Everything needs to be done immediately or we can't close XYZ. It also comes in the form of product marketing is working on a specific type of messaging, and we have a lot of content. And it seems like sometimes sales are just kind of going off the rails and doing something completely different. There's also a lot of times arguments over the quality the leads are coming in from the marketing side and the quality of the content as it relates to specific deals. This is all a symptom of a bigger problem, which is that you have an alignment problem. And what really causes this a lot of times is marketing is just really focused on creating this intangible future. So there's the messaging component, there's the how you're positioning yourself, there's, how do you generate awareness, pipeline, differentiation, all these other things. And from a sales side, a lot of times they're looking at, I'm just trying to close this immediate deal. I have all these needs, I get all these requests, and it's now, we need to get these things done immediately. And in addition to that, there's no common language, which really just makes this much worse because now it's like marketing is focused on something, sales is focused on something else. And then you'll start hearing these conversations like, oh, so-and-so doesn't understand what I'm doing. And, they're doing it the wrong way. And it's this lack of alignment that results from all of these factors. And just one of the things that causes this alignment at a very, very simple high level is the way that marketing versus sales, how they drive revenue. So for marketing, we're thinking about this more comprehensive end-to-end process a lot of times, starting with very early on in the awareness stage and really being able to tell a differentiated story, get that air cover. And then where product marketing really excels a lot of times is also supporting the acquisition. So supporting sales as they're thinking about getting that quality pipeline and then helping them win in particular. And then there's all this stuff that happens afterwards as well in terms of once a customer becomes a customer, how do you actually drive advocacy? How do you get success stories and then support retention and upsells and all these other things? So again, very simplistically, a lot of times what sales is completely focused on is just this middle bucket of how do we get sales done today? But marketing is really thinking about this end to end, like we have to have the right messaging. We have to also support sales. We have to do all these other things. And then we have to make sure that we're doing this flywheel over and over again so that we're continuing to win. And so this kind of leads to some of the challenges that need to be addressed. And then I've seen again and again that there's a lot of criteria that need to be met in order to have that better alignment across go-to-market. The first thing is having some kind of common ground. So defining common pipeline metrics that really matter, and then making sure that it's actually the same metrics, because a lot of times sales will be looking at things a little bit differently. In particular cases, sometimes you'll have a RVP who's just looking at their specific region. They're looking at just one or two deals that were very recent, and they're not thinking more holistically. And that's where having a common set of pipeline metrics and having something that everyone can go back to as a single source of truth really matters. Then within that, you have to have the right collective goals and the right individual goals. So collective goals are the ones that matter for everyone and that everyone needs to think about. And individual ones are the ones that specific teams, specific individuals ultimately impact. And then from that, one of the things that's also really important is to be able to clearly call out where we're making bets. And this is particularly true for marketing, where a lot of times things are kind of a little bit, you're creating messaging you're taking a bet in terms of what you think is going to resonate, what you think is going to work. But sometimes that may or may not work. And so being able to be explicit about this is a bet versus this is a sure thing is going to help with that. And then finally is really making sure that you have the right people and culture to really support all of these things and make it work. So if we kind of deep dive into these, starting with defining common pipeline metrics. So this is really about having a single source of truth. And this is something that I've seen implemented very well at places like Coupa, where there is an ongoing pipeline council that goes over, here's what's happening across the end-to-end process. And that's at the high level in terms of the company level. But specifically when it comes to product marketing, it's really thinking about which particular phases you're impacting or you're specifically trying to impact with a piece of content or overall messaging, and then really being able to communicate that out and having buy-in and a single source of truth that everyone can go back to in terms of evaluating the success of specific initiatives. So at a very high level, and this is going to vary quite a bit based on the company you have and the business you have, things that tend to really matter is, first of all these different stages. So we have some high level buckets here, but within each company, there's different levels of specificity you need around marketing and sales staging. But one of the things that matters is how much volume are you driving across each of these buckets? Are you getting enough people who are coming in as leads? Are you having enough people kind of converting into actual prospects? How many of those are actually becoming customers? So looking at that overall volume, and then also looking at what is going on between stage to stage. So say you have a big bucket of, sometimes they're called inquiries, sometimes leads, sometimes just contacts. How many of those are actually converting to the next level? That really matters. So having some alignment around that and having some alignment around how to measure that really helps, again, get to a common language. And then across that, when you're looking at overall planning, then you can take weighted probabilities of what is actually going to close at the end of the day based on both volume and win rates. So then once you have that kind of framework set, the things that really matter from that point on is what are the collective goals that everyone is aligned around? And what are the individual goals that people need to really focus on in terms of impacting that ultimate result? In terms of how do you set goals, some best practices here are to really think about things in terms of overall revenue marketing. So I say revenue marketing because at the end of the day, what everyone cares about is how much money are we going to be able to make? So how much are we closing and actually converting into real customers and continuing to retain and upsell over time? So it's really about this revenue component. And that's something that across any go-to-market team really, really matters. The other thing that then matters is also kind of isolating the individual stages and then making sure that when you're thinking about what works or doesn't work, that you're thinking of it in the context of that specific stage. So something that's a little bit earlier in the pipeline is going to be less defined and less clear whether or not that converts into an actual customer. Then, of course, later on, if you're already kind of negotiating a deal, it's a very different type of metrics. And then based on that, it's kind of optimizing those win rates and, figuring out how do you, not just the overall win rate, but how do you get those conversions from stage to stage? And then the other thing that's also really important is getting feedback. So it's sometimes the best leading indicator of whether or not messaging is working or specific campaigns are working is the specific feedback you're getting. And that's much more real time. So that's coming from both sales, but also directly from the prospect. Now, the caveat here is, especially for product marketing, is that you need to take feedback with a grain of salt as well, because every single person who gives feedback has their own unique perspectives. And it's understanding that context that really matters. So for instance, I've definitely been in a lot of situations where sales will kind of over-index on the last 3 deals that they got. And you have to be able to contextualize what they're saying to understand, whether or not that's broadly relevant to other campaigns, other deals, other prospects out there. So for product marketing in particular, there's a lot of things that you can do to make sure that you're measuring product marketing correctly. So the first metric that really matters, the first thing that really helps in terms of measuring the success of your messaging and campaigns you're running is looking at the win-loss at the end of the day. So we've at Coupa, we had a win-loss program, and this is very common for any kind of organization, really. But it's making sure that you're going back, and on the one hand, you have those qualitative metrics of, when you speak to the prospect at the end of the day, what did they say? What made them choose your product or not? What other competitors did they see? How can you better message to them? But it's also, the thing with that is that's very kind of a heavy lift way to get that feedback. And you have to invest quite a lot into actually going and speaking to individuals. And in some cases, we've, a lot of times in the past, I've contracted that out to specific organizations who do just win-loss. The thing that also supplements that is what you're tracking within your CRM. So within Salesforce, within whatever else you're using, how are you capturing specific fields that let you know what are some top reasons why you're winning or losing? There's the other thing, again, I keep going back to this. The next thing is thinking about those win rates by stage, because the overall win-loss, while very, very informative and extremely helpful in terms of how do you want to do your messaging, is also not going to tell you more nuanced things that are happening across different stages. So is something resonating better at the top of the funnel versus the bottom of the funnel? And then how do you need to adjust your messaging and your positioning based on that? So it's kind of going through each of those stages and making sure that you're really aligned as to what's happening. Another area that's really important for measurement is when collateral is actually created, how is that being adopted by your teams? And at Coupa and at previous companies, we've used certain vendors who will actually allow you to distribute collateral directly. And then as part of that distribution through those platforms, there's a lot of analytics on the back end and insights in terms of what's being adopted, both internally in terms of your sales team actually using it, but also externally when it's actually being sent out, who's opening it, how much engagement are your prospects getting? And that's a really good indicator of whether or not the things that you're creating is even having any kind of impact at all. And that's those platforms are generally available. I mean, we use things like HighSpot, but there's also, HubSpot will have capabilities that allow you to see what's being used and what's not. But that only tells you the actual adoption of that collateral. It doesn't tell you whether or not that's resonating. And so this is where sales and prospect feedback really matters. And there's different ways to do this. I've, in past lives, sent out surveys to our teams and just try to evaluate overall how they're engaging with the collateral. Is it resonating? Do they feel that it's actually having an impact? You can also go, of course, interview individuals and try to get that information that way. But the thing that I think is actually a really, really good best practice here is to, on occasion, and this is the last point, go in and actually sit in on a couple of these deals. And this is not doable, obviously, for every single deal you have out there, but selectively sampling a couple of deals that are really important or really have really move your pipeline. And actually either in today's remote world, it's actually a lot easier because you can actually record these sessions and then go back later and just kind of look at how it's landing. And things I try to always look for is not just, what's being said, but also how the prospect is actually reacting. Because when you look at those recordings, it becomes much more evident in real time when this particular slide is being presented, how that's kind of what kind of engagement you're getting or not getting. And this is actually being made much easier with a lot of tools out there. So for instance, I think Gong is allowing our team to record what they're saying when they're talking to specific prospects. And that way it's easy to tag afterwards which specific sections of those recordings are worth watching. And that also helps, again, disseminate the feedback collectively across the team and make sure that you have a common language so that when you're having discussions about what's working or not, you can refer back to something that's concrete. So the next thing that really helps in terms of assuring alignment is to clearly call out when you're making a bet versus when you're doing something that you think is going to work and resonate overall. So this is something that sometimes is a little bit kind of implicit and isn't clear. And that's, again, one of the reasons why sometimes sales and marketing has this lack of alignment. So for instance, one of the things I've tried to do recently is think about, is there areas where we know we have clear evidence that this particular campaign, this particular message, this particular piece of content will work? We've just seen it work over and over again. We've been requested these particular pieces of content over and over again. And it's just something that we know is a good thing to do. And then there's also areas for marketing in particular where you're experimenting. You have a hypothesis, you've gotten some feedback. You don't know if that's actually going to be the right thing to say or do, but you'd like to see. And this is where you have to say, look, we are explicitly making this bet. We are trying to learn from this. And if it doesn't work, you have to also be very open to backtracking. And so I've put some illustrative examples here, but there's certain areas where we're making longer term investments where, and for us, we're an earlier stage company. So obviously everyone knows Gartner is really important, but when you're earlier stage, looking at analysts, sometimes it feels like it's very kind of undefined how that's going to impact a company. So you have to be clear with the sales team. Look, we are doing these things and it might create a little bit of extra work and it might not seem like it's very valuable right now, but it's going to pay off over the long term. And here's some of the hypotheses we have around when it's going to pay off. And when you make that bet explicit and then you get buy-in from sales that this matters, that this is something that's going to really move the needle over time, that's when you start actually having their support. And so that they're clear that this is something that will benefit them. It just may be that at this current moment, they're not seeing it. And then the final thing that really, really matters is who you have in the room and then how you're enabling them to collaborate. So there's two things that are super important in order to build a spirit of collaboration. And of course, on the one hand, it's the individuals and who are the people that are actually across on the team. And then on the other hand, it's this culture and how you as an organization, as a company are supporting this collaboration across go-to-market. So for an individual level, you have to look for individuals who are willing to buy into the greater good. You know, they're sales leaders, they're marketing leaders, they're individual contributors on each of these areas, but they also see the bigger picture that all this ultimately ties back to revenue and ultimately to what matters for the company overall and moving things forward. And then within that, you have to have people who are able to find common ground, because a lot of times where the disagreements come from, there's usually some area where you can find something that everyone can align around, but it comes down to individuals and being able to define those areas where there is common ground. And then these individuals also have to be open to having an open discussion and feedback. And this is something I particularly value in a lot of the organizations I've worked at, and I've seen work well in certain contexts and not work well in certain other contexts, is your sales counterpart, are the other people that you're working with, are they willing to have sometimes very frank discussions and do it in a way that creates psychological safety, but also ensures that everyone is ultimately working towards the same goals. So that's on an individual level. And then on a cultural level, there are a lot of things that organizations can do to really support the spirit of collaboration. The first is celebrating collective wins. It's not just, sales won this deal or marketing did this great thing and, got this endorsement from Gartner. It's really about how we've collectively driven the better good for everyone. Supporting clear communication channels, ensuring that there's communication, that there's a good cadence in which communication is happening on an ongoing basis, and then creating structure around that. And then also in terms of performance reviews and promotions, it's really looking for individuals who are collaborative and not just, sometimes you'll have rock star top performers who are doing one thing really well, but at the expense of the entire organization. So it's really promoting people with an eye towards how are they driving the overall success of the organization, not just their little area that they're focused on. And so that's the 4 criteria. It's really finding the common pipeline metrics and making sure you have a single source of truth, making sure that within that there are collective goals that people care about, and then individual goals that each person is thinking about towards that collective goal. Calling out explicitly when there are bets being made versus when something is being done because we're very clear that this is the thing that is being asked for is going to work. And then also making sure that there's a people and a culture that really supports collaboration and values driving collective success. So with that, I am going to, if anyone has any questions or wants to connect, here's some of my contact information. And I think we're right at time, but if there's anyone who has a quick quick question. I'm going to try to move back over here and figure out how to do this.
Thank you so much, Charlene. I have a question. Can you tell us a specific example of a bet that maybe you guys had in your go-to-market plan? How was it, defined? How was it described? What were the expectations, etc.?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, I can definitely talk about that. So I actually gave some examples in here. I think went over it pretty quickly, but so right now we're making a lot of bets. I mean, this because I'm at an earlier stage company, so it's actually really interesting. A lot of things we're doing are bets. So we are, for instance, this is an interesting example because it's very clear to other people who are later stage companies. I was at Coupa, and obviously analysts is something that's super, super important. But at a company like Fin, where we're Series A, it's not very obvious to people why we're spending time talking to the likes of Gartner or Forrester. So you have to be very clear about, and in terms of how I try to communicate that is say, look, here's the time frame of what this looks like. Let me give you examples of, in my past life, and also in other organizations we've been in, how much this matters. And, the potential impact of this is huge. And I can give you some examples, and we can't quantify it, but qualitatively, it's really, really important. And being able to call out, first of all, what's the anticipated impact and goal that we're trying to drive, the time frame in which we're trying to drive it, specific indicators that it's working or not, like has Gartner started putting us into, one of their marketscapes. And I'm forgetting the exact term, but, are they starting to feature us? Are they starting to talk about us? Those are leading indicators before you get into a Magic Quadrant. So being able to show those milestones and communicate that out on a regular basis, that gets a lot more buy-in from sales who are constantly asking for like, hey, I need this, I need that. Why are you not doing this instead?
Awesome. Thank you so much, Charlene.
Yeah. Thank you.
Catch you later.